Welcome to Archery Country Podcast. Welcome, everybody, back to Archery Country Podcast as we're sitting in the Rogers studio, happy and willing on a, don't even know what day it is, but it's a good day. We're set up to do an awesome podcast, and it couldn't be better timing. As we're sitting here, I have Jake Schlungen with me, and our guest today, we've had a lot of questions about food plots and seed and what I need to plant, and education is very, very good, and we have probably one of the most and smartest guys that we know on the market from Grandpa Ray Outdoors, Mr. John O'Brien. How you doing, John?
I'm doing well, and I'm glad that you guys invited me to speak a little bit today.
We're glad to have you. We've sold your product in here this year, and it's been an awesome acceptance from other people. Very easy product to sell, a very easy website to follow. Everything's right there. But we're just going to give a little bit more knowledge, so it's not just a pro shop guy telling you verbiage. We're going to get it out on our podcast. We have a ton of listeners, and we're glad that you're here to tell us. If you wouldn't mind, just a little background, not only on your farming and your agricultural background, your hunting background. If you just take us on a little windy story here about you.
Yeah, I was born on a farm in south central Wisconsin. We had beef, we had dairy, and crop farming, and that's kind of where I got my agronomic background. I had a lot of influence, from the farm and my mom's dad, who was named Grandpa, which is Grandpa Ray, which is what I named my business after. And, growing up, I was actively involved in, soils and feeding cattle, et cetera, et cetera. And, Grandpa Ray's is just basically accumulation of my life's work, getting a degree in college and getting into nutrition work, working with farmers, and then eventually it evolved into deer, working with, both deer farmers as well as people that wanted to plant food plots for, free-range wild deer. And so basically Grandpa Ray's is kind of a tribute to my grandpa who influenced my life, and also was basically, a philosophy that I've had and an interest I've had, and real life experiences, working day to day with soil, animals, and seed.
I love it, and that's where a ton of your seed blends, we say that because you do offer quite a few different blends, but over how many years would you say, you said as a kid growing up, but how many years have you been putting together blends and seeing what works the best in different scenarios?
Yeah, I got out of college in 1990, and in 1991, the same time I got involved with doing a lot of nutrition work with farmers, I also started working with farmers that were rotational grazing, planting different pasture blends for their cattle. And I believe it was that same year, I had a couple different customers ask me, it's like, hey, can you give me this seed? Can you give me that seed? And I investigated different suppliers and decided to start also as a sidelight that year selling seeds. And that same year, I believe it was, where I was attending they call it a pasture walk on a farm, and I saw where a farmer was that planted turnips and was grazing his cows on turnips, and the light bulb, turned on for me at that time. Decided to plant some on about an acre and a half of land, and away she went. My food plot interest began back in the early 90s.
And when we talk about your certain plots that you've developed over, multiple year setups, it's not just basis on eye appeal for the consumer to plant a very lush green, let's say clover plot or Frosty Delight. There's actually a nutritional background. There's actually studies of what you found, because not only are we feeding the deer, but we want healthy, mature, growing animals, correct?
Right. And so the wildlife industry historically has been made up of companies that have put together mixes that were in a fancy looking bag that, to be honest, a lot of our most common food plot forages that people plant or that are sold out there are not always the highest yielding, that they're not always the most nutritious. A lot of times profit margin, price point is at the foremost. I mean, that's what companies, they're selling all these seeds. I mean, they're in it to make money, which you can't blame them. But Grand Prairie Outdoors has a totally different approach because, my whole career has been about growing healthy, productive animals. And so there's thought behind every blend. There's strategy behind every blend. And with each blend, nutrition is part of it. And that's why we're always testing new forages, sampling in my various research plots, the different forages, so that, we know what we're actually selling. And I don't cut corners with anything. I'm selling the most high yielding, most attractive, most nutritious forages that I can get my hands on.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like this is one of my passions is the land management part and putting food plots in, and I spend as much time putting food plots in and working on the ground as I do hunting probably in a year. And I kind of came across your stuff to bring into our stores because of the blends and the quality of the blends. I felt like not only was the quality there, but being in the Midwest and a little colder climate, I think you had a really great lineup for what we're looking for too. Our growing days are a little less. Our frost dates are earlier. We don't have the same scenarios to work with as some of the southern states or, even you get to Illinois and south, Yeah,
and the one thing that I'm even looking at doing this year, I'm pretty blessed because I would like to think that I'm pretty respected in the industry for my research. I do research for a couple different companies that are larger companies, and because of that, even this year we're looking at as long as the seed shows up from the boat, having two unique brassicas that nobody else has in the U.S. Grand Prairie's released that has part of their lineup a forage brassica that very few people have, but I'm always looking to get newer, improved genetics. That not just helps people in Minnesota and Wisconsin, but also a lot of these forages can be planted anywhere in the U.S. But I'm eager to test out two new ones that could be really unique to the industry, and especially for guys, a little bit farther north, like where you're at. We might be a year or two away from selling it or adding it to part of the lineup. But again, I'm always testing it myself on various soils, various properties. And if I can get it to work, well, then we'll offer it to the general public.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think we should kind of start this off with, where we're at this time of year. We might have guys that have planted spring plots, in their soybeans or corn plots, and now we're looking at some of their fall plots, or, some guys might be totally scratching their spring plots because of how dry it's been. If they're not germinated well enough or been too drought stressed. Where are we at? What do you recommend for timing as far as these blends? Site prep, soil prep, fertilization and lime. Just kind of give a rundown of where we're at this time of year.
Yeah. And so where you guys are located, in Minnesota there, and when we look at the calendar, I mean, the calendar, always, is a start, but again, Mother Nature can affect, when you can plant. And it seems like our weather the last few years, I mean, we could go from being too cold to too hot to too wet to too dry all in one growing season. Generally, we would say when you get to about July 1st, we usually shut down for about a month with whatever you're going to plant. Your soybeans, your corn, your sorghums, things like my deer and bird or fortress screening. Generally, I say, well, once you get around July 1st, you should probably be done. It should be in the ground. And then, even, it says even on a lot of the bags I sell, the small bags, I have different generic plant recommendations, fertilizer recommendations, things like that. I generally say, well, the next window for planting your fall plots is August 1st. Well, I've had to kind of, I use that as a disclaimer because, different people that I work with in your area, I say, well, let's just say it's not extremely hot. If we got enough soil moisture, if we have weather trends where it looks like there's enough timely rains coming in the forecast for the next couple of weeks, I'm starting to tell people, hey, if it gets to July 20th, it gets to July 25th, everything's, looking good, we might want to get some of these blends in the ground. So with that being said, we look at, maybe we got 3 to 4 weeks before a lot of people are going to want to start planting your fall plots. So if the ground hasn't been worked yet, if weeds haven't been controlled yet, now is the time. Get those weeds sprayed if they're above threshold level where you need to spray weeds. Wait 7 to 10 days to work the ground. The one little thing I will say is people tend to overwork the ground. And when we overwork the ground, there's some negatives. We can dry out that soil if it is periods of dry weather. But if we do work the ground, we're just trying to incorporate some of that residue. We're just trying to only work the soil, 1 to 2 inches deep. And then when we get into planting, then we're ready to go. So if there's already, something planted out there right now, like my soil builder, again, that's, usually you'll just try to spray it off 7 to 10 days before planting if there's weeds, or just clip it off and, and get ready to go for fall planting. So if there's soil samples that haven't been taken, now's the time to do it. If there's, if you need lime, you can lime any time of year, but now's the time to get that pellet lime down. Egg lime takes up to 6 months to work. Pellet lime will kick in within about 2 months. So, don't wait till planting day to lime. Let's get that lime down now.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing. And I really got to sit down for myself and look at the calendar and get in a range of, okay, this is when I'm going to plant this and work it back, because that stuff sneaks up on you quick and you don't have your weed control taken care of and you don't have your site prep done. And then you plant this plot and it gets taken over by weeds anyways, or you don't have your soil sample, and you're just not setting yourself up for the success you could have. One of the other things is you have quite the variety of fall blends. We got from greens and grains to Frosty Delight to Fall Draw to Bulbs Galore. We can kind of take those one at a time here and kind of, explain to some of our listeners what is incorporated in those and why you would look at certain blends and incorporate them into your food plot plan. We could start out with greens and grains. That's one of my favorite mixes that you have. Maybe I'll just let you take it away and kind of explain what's in that and why, and then maybe, kind of your preferred planting dates too with some of these different mixes, and if that changes from some of these greens and grains, or to your more brassicas like your Frosty Delight, which are more brassicas based. But I'll let you take it over.
Yeah. So greens and greens is an excellent food plot blend for the first time food plotter. There's a property I was on in northern Minnesota about 2 months ago, and a lot of these plots are brand new. And so this year we're planting greens and greens on a lot of those new plots. So first-time food plotters, or even if there's somebody that's got sandier ground or lower pH ground, greens and greens is relatively foolproof. It's got a blend. Everybody seems to love winter rye. And of course, there's an inclusion of winter rye, but I also have winter triticale, which matures a little slower in the spring. I believe it's a little more palatable to deer, according to what deer tell me. There's also winter wheat in there. There's buckwheat in there. There's peas, which are highly desirable to deer in the fall. And then it's got 4 different brassicas. My Winford brassica, which is super cold tolerant, kale, which is cold tolerant, radish, and then, of course, turnips there. So that blend, the advantage of it is it'll grow pretty much anywhere. It will also regrow next spring, the winter wheat, winter triticale, winter rye. So again, that'll help create some residue, naturally smother weeds, give the deer, some rapidly growing forage in the spring. So that's just a really diverse mix. That mix, though, we might want to wait about 7 days later to plant than some of my other blends, which we'll get into. Just because the winter wheat, winter rye, winter triticale, typically people don't plant that, or farmers don't put that in the ground until middle of August in your area. Some cases as late as September 1st, but that's a mix that will mature in about 60 days. Although most of my mixes this fall will mature in 60 days. So if you just count back from your first average frost date, down in my area, it's October 10th. In a lot of your customers' areas, I'm guessing about the last few days in September, maybe. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think we're into the 20s, right in the early 20s, I think is probably our average.
Yeah. So, so again, you still be probably all right in most areas to plant around August 1st, even with the grains and greens. So, greens and greens, like I said, will handle all soil types. It can handle, moderate shade. It's a great mix for a first-time food plotter, a great mix for those that have maybe a little bit lower soil pHs, and you're going to need another few months to a year or two to get your soil right where you need it to be. So again, for people that are planting, I generally recommend planting at least 2 of my blends. Why is that? Because you can practice plot rotation, which is why I sell 4 blends and not just 1. And it also is a reason for doing plot rotation, because you could plant brassicas in the same field for many years in a row if you're not just using heavy or pure brassica blends. And this grains and greens is about, the final stamp percentage to be about half grain and half brassicas. So, almost everybody that's new to the food plot game is planting that. Even if you've been planting food plots for a lot of years, and yet you're really looking at improving your soil health, consider part of your plots as grains and greens.
So,
and then if you want me to just move into each of the mixes and just kind of go over each of them?
I think the other thing that would be good is with each one of these, every year we got guys coming in here, they're grabbing that bag of seed and they're going out to plant. They didn't either have the time, summer was busy, they don't have soil samples. What would be your generic, if the customer doesn't have a soil sample, which would be the best, what's their generic recommendation for fertilizer for grains and greens?
Yeah, right. So anybody that buys any of the small bags of my fall blends, there's a generic fertilizer recommendation on the bag. But, as a rule of thumb, the average food plotter planting any of these 4 brassica blends, 200 to 400 pounds per acre of a triple 18. Some people that aren't as up on the numbers on fertilizers, they might say, well, I can't get a triple 18 locally, but they got a triple 15 or a triple 17. Any of those triple fertilizers would work. We'd like to buy the higher number if possible. So, if somebody, wasn't sure what to do, they haven't got a soil sample back, or for whatever reason they decide not to, if you just put down 300 pounds of a triple 17, triple 18, or triple 19 fertilizer, you're going to be pretty much in the game as a generic fertilizer recommendation. But there is one other strategy that could even be a little better. So let's just say somebody has access to a 923 fertilizer. A little lower in nitrogen, but it's got the phosphorus, potassium up there. You could put 150 to 200 pounds of your 923-30, which some people could be using on your clovers and some of the other blends, and then just come back with 1 bag an acre or 50 pounds an acre about 3 to 5 weeks after planting with some straight urea. And again, that's one strategy so that you're not beating the weeds as much initially. Those plants don't need as much nitrogen that first 3 weeks of their growth cycle. But besides that, Mother Nature comes in. If you put all your fertilizer down right at planting, we get a couple really big, heavy rains. Maybe some of that fertilizers ran down the Mississippi, and, kind of joking a little bit there, but, ran down to your neighbors, ran off the field, not where you wanted it to be. So you're kind of split applicating it, and I'm trying to get more and more people to consider split applicating your fertilizers. So there's always that option.
Yeah, I think
those
that's
people that just want to do a little better.
Yeah, and I like that too, because especially with the weather patterns we seem to have, we get these long. Well, it seems like the last couple of years we get these long 3-4 weeks with not much moisture, and then you get this little window of moisture. So at least if you can split, applicate your fertilizer, you probably got a little better chance of success with that food plot too.
You're right. Yep. And most people aren't used to doing that. But again, I just kind of consider to say, hey, put a starter down and then just come back with the nitrogen when the plants demand it the most.
Yeah, I like that. All right. How about Frosty Delight? I know that's another one that's, popular for what we get guys looking for.
Yeah, Frosty Delight. It's my most cold tolerant, high yielding brassica blend. And because it's got the kale and the Winford brassica, they mature more like in about 80 days versus a lot of these, industry sold rape type products that mature in 45 to 60 days. So they mature a little slower, which can be good, especially for those people that want to put the seed in the ground a little earlier. The other advantage of the Winford brassica is if deer eat it, let's just say a deer eat it on September 15th, it ends up doubling its branches. It's actually multi-grade. So if the deer eat, some of the brassicas that are in these blends, it's not done. I mean, it will throw more branches and it will continue to regrow as long as the weather is right for it. So Frosty Delight has radishes. It's got rutabaga. And for those that aren't as familiar with rutabaga, they look a lot like turnips, but have the potential to get about another 30 to 50% bigger bulbs. The bulbs are sweeter, and for anybody out there that has ever ate a rutabaga or compared to a turnip, you have a pretty good idea what I'm talking about. Turnips tend to be a little bit more bitter, especially when they get mature, and the rutabagas are more desirable. Plus, the other thing with rutabaga is they have a smoother leaf, a bigger leaf that tends to naturally resist insects and disease better than turnips. And so, when the weather is not perfect, rutabagas tend to handle Mother Nature better than the common turnip that most people are used to planting. So, Frosty Delight is a great nutritious mix, high yielding mix, but also it's really more of a forgiving mix than a lot of the brassica blends sold by the industry.
And John, not to deter off of what you're talking about, but every one of your packages has a seed rate and then also what the poundage is on the bag. I know that I fell into the category back before I got fired as a food plot dude for my brothers. I was the guy that would buy 10 times as amount of seed that I needed because I thought more is better. But there's actually a ratio that you want to stick. Like you're talking about Frosty Delight, the seed rates is 7 to 10 pounds per acre. And then you can get it in a 4 1/4 pound bag or a 25 pound bag. So you kind of have to, got to do a little bit of math, on your acreage and that. And you don't want to overseed. Am I right? Or is that a problem?
Right. So on brassicas, that's where it's more important to try to seed as close to the level that's recommended. Clovers, there's some advantages with seeding a little heavy. But again, with brassica, especially if you're using a product like my bulbs galore, which has got basically rutabaga, turnips, radish, if you seed too heavy, you won't have those bulbs develop as big and as effective as what you're trying to accomplish. Same deal with these brassicas. Yeah, they might have a little thinner stem, but you won't get quite the height and the bulb development, which there is radishes in all my blends. There is either rutabaga or turnip in each of my blends. So again, if the recommended rate is 7 to 10 pounds an acre and a guy was feeding down 15 pounds an acre, you're just not going to have as effective bulb growth. You could see some stunted growth. You could see some stress conditions, because, having all those extra plants per acre, they demand a lot of nutrients. And so definitely stay within the ranges of what I recommend per bag. Because here's something else to think about. A lot of companies sell coated seed. So if they were selling a bag like my bag of Frosty Delight, it's 4.25 pounds. It'll plant about a half acre. But some companies might be selling a 5-pound bag that they say plants a half acre, but they might have a third of that seed being coated. So Grandpa Ray's in the fall blends does not sell coated seed. We also sell seed that's high germ count. I don't buy cheap seed. I buy high quality seed that goes in my blends. So again, most of these tags that I have on there, you'll see that most forages are over 90% germ count. But to be honest, a lot of these are in that 95 to 98% germ. The reason why I put 90% on the label is just to make sure that we never ever fail a test. If a bag of seed has been sitting around for 9 months, it gets and somebody plants it. We assure you that you're buying what we are selling you. You're getting what you're paid for, and you're getting pure live seed. So that could be either a sales tool, or it could also be for the end user. It's like, okay, I don't need to put as much seed down per acre because I'm getting high quality seed that's not coated.
Yeah, and that's not the place you want to cheap out. That's on the seed fertilizer, or the other thing I see people doing is just mixing their spray too thin too, trying to make that go a little too far. Now with the Frosty Delight, what happens if what on the maturity range of that? You said 80 days to mature. If you can hit that,
on the wind for the kale.
Yep. If you can hit that mix perfect on your plant date, how many days do you want to be out? And what happens if somebody plants early and over matures with that?
Right. There's some people I work with. I have one producer that every year plants in June in Minnesota, and he has tremendous growth, good soil, et cetera, et cetera. If a guy was going to be planting now, which there's some people that have, I always say to them, with my blends being more multi-graze, you would have to go out there and take the tops off of like a weed whacker or bush hog or whatever, because otherwise, once they mature, they'll start drying down, turning brown, they're less desirable. And the key is the biggest reason most people are planting food plots are because they want to see deer, and they want to see deer, I'm assuming closer to your stand. So, a lot of people seem to get excited. They want to get their seed in the ground, and that's understandable. But again, you like to plant as close to 60 days before an average first frost date as possible. The one thing is, again, because Grandpa Ray's doesn't just sell your traditional rates that mature in 45 to 60 days, but because we tend to have kales and the Winford brassicas in our mixes are a little more forgiving. Sure, we could put them in the ground a little sooner, but for example, the radishes that are in each blend mature in about 45 to 50 days. But for the Frosty Delight and the fall draw that I mentioned, Rutabagas mature more like in 80 days versus the common purple top turnips mature in about 60 days. So really what I'm saying is, sure, for some of those guys that want to plant early or do plant early, Grandpa Ray's mixes give you more of a cushion, because a number of the forages mature slower, which, will make your mixes more desirable later into the year, even for those that are kind of pushing the window a little bit on planting dates, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so we're looking that first week of August is probably a good point to start with or to aim for if you're in our area, probably.
Right. Yeah, another thing, people even though we've been talking about first frost date and that, is because a lot of these forages we're selling are more cold tolerant than a lot of the common brassica blends sold in the industry. So even if you did have a frost, as I mentioned, the kales, the Winfreds, and that stay green down to about 10 degrees, we're still going to be seeing some growth. That doesn't mean our forages or our blends are going to be shutting down just because there's a frost. In a lot of cases, we can handle that initial cold period of time because we are selling more cold tolerant forages.
Good to know. So then we go to like the bulbs galore. So what's the main difference for someone looking between the Frosty Delight and bulbs galore?
Yeah, bulbs galore I put together, for people that, it will handle a variety of soils. It'll handle sandy ground, heavier ground. Doesn't necessarily like water, because brassicas don't love it when it's wet, and especially the bulbs. Bulbs won't grow effectively when there's a lot of moisture, high amount of moisture in the soil. But bulbs galore is designed, not even though the deer could be eating it in August, September, October. It's designed for more of that late season, gun season, late season bow or muzzle loading, or, after season, when the weather can get to be pretty nasty, snow's flying, at times getting a little thick and deep, that it's designed where the deer can paw down, get at those bulbs, get that winter energy source in them that they need to sustain themselves in good condition throughout the winter. And it also I kind of say to people, it also doubles as your shed plot. Because what you'll tend to find is in that February, March, and if the weather's nasty, I guess in the area, it could be late January, the bucks could be dropping their antlers. But if those are the areas that the bucks especially, are congregating in the winter, a lot of times their antlers are getting knocked off as they're digging down to get at the bulbs, and that helps you find a lot of these sheds. And so for those, I kind of call it like little shed plots as well.
So, and then we have the fall draw. I know that's another one, and that's not as cold tolerant, if I'm correct on that.
Right, but there still is, a couple of those forage brassicas that stay green, really late, down to about 10 degrees. But that's a good all-purpose mix. That's probably where more of the nice bucks are shot in early bow season, because we got some annual clovers there. We also have a forage that's really unique to the industry called Ethiopian Cabbage. Really drought tolerant, especially for those guys on light soil, sandy ground. Grows super fast, could get to be about 40 inches tall in about 5-6 weeks. And that Ethiopian cabbage is really desirable to deer in that 7 to 10 day window in that early October. And the fall draw is designed to be diverse. It's designed to be very attractive early season, but yet we still got some Rutabaga in there for late season. In the winter, we still got the Winfred brassica in there for cold tolerant and late bow season and gun season attraction. So, Joan, it's probably my most appealing all season brassica blend.
And as far as seeding date and fertilizer requirements, are you similar to your other fall blends?
Right. I would stick with the same fertilizer recommendations as the other fall blends. But again, my disclaimer is that people have taken a soil sample, and it tends to be pretty common that guys might already be excessive on phosphorus, especially in areas where there's maybe been some past farming or current farming going on, where you might just need a bunch of straight potassium with some urea on those blends. So fall draw is going to yield very similar. All those 4 blends are going to yield pretty similar, depending on planting date, weather, soil quality, management practices. So again, for those that don't have a soil sample, I would stick with the 200 to 400 pounds of a straight triple fertilizer, or unless the guy was going to be using a starter and separate urea, as I mentioned before.
Yeah. Now the other thing I think to think about in the fall is planting some of your clovers or like your gold. Do you recommend like planting that with a nurse crop in the fall, like doing like an oat with it, or like a forage oat or something? Or what's your thoughts on that for guys thinking about getting an annual crop going?
Yeah, so I put that in my last newsletter. There's been a lot of discussion with people because of the weather this year that maybe their spring plots didn't turn out as well because it was too dry or whatnot. And so, like, if people wanted to seed down, like my Mass Builder Gold Intersanctum, overseed mix. You know, there's some advantages to fall seeding because you tend to see less weeds. My recommendation is you could use a half rate of my soil builder at planting. You could be using a rate of any of my fall mixes. Although ideally we'd prefer to use the Frosty Delight or the Fall Draw. So instead of like, you know, that 7 to 10 pounds of Frosty Delight per acre, maybe use one bag, you know, one of the 4 1/4 pound bags per acre, along with the full rate of a product like Gold or Mass Builder. And Nebraska blend will in essence, you know, act as a nurse crop. Could you use 50 to 100 pounds per acre of oats? Sure. If you wanted a little bit of some regrowth next spring, could you use 50 pounds of, you know, winter wheat, winter rye, or winter triticale per acre as a fall planted nurse crop? Sure. And again, you're not going to see a lot of growth on any of these clovers in the fall. Depending on the weather, you might see, you know, 6 to 12 inches of growth. But what happens is come springtime, you know, instead of not seeing a lot of clovers out there until, you know, really mid-May, I mean, you'll see an explosive early growth, and that gives you a lot of desirable forages to the does and the bucks, you know, after the snow disappears in the winter.
Yeah, and I really like that strategy because then I feel like you're not struggling so hard in the spring to get those blends in, and you're kind of, you know, multi-using your fall plots in the fall coming through the winter. You have those clovers or the alfalfa right away. You got good food, and a little bit different strategy to try to diversify yourself a little bit. You know, I think that. Go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, the one thing with that is because even for those that frost seed, we've had, you know, hit and miss weather the last few years. And so at least if you get roots underneath these plants, you get them planted in the fall. I mean, it seems like so many people are, you know, struggle with weeds come spring if you work the ground. And even if you're frost seeding, you know, it can be a little bit challenging at times. So again, if you fall seed, you have a pretty good idea how your catch was. And then you got an easy decision. You can either spin a little more seed via frost seeding, or let's just say if it gets to be middle of April, early May, and you're out there scouting and your fall plots caught, great. Guess what? Your work's done. Or if it's a little thin in spots, you still got a lot of time to spin some seed, thicken it up. So again, it can really cut down on the amount of work you have to do. I really, really want more people to consider fall seeding, you know, your perennial plots. And more farmers and progressive farmers in the upper Midwest have went to fall seeding their alfalfa fields, and that, why not consider doing it by the average food plotter?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and that, you know, I think that brings up the point of, you know, a person looking at how much ground they have for food plots and how much they want to put in, and then the importance of diversity, and to be able to rotate through, like you've been saying, and you know, you've got all these different blends. Is there a percentage that you usually go with between these blends, or between like a Greens and Grains and Frosty Delight or Fall Draw, you know, and then with some of your clovers, or your Gold with your alfalfa blend?
Right. And so that's one of the deals where I work with, you know, hundreds of people every year directly with, you know, looking at the aerial maps and coming up with strategies. But no matter who you are, I mean, there's different factors that come into play. What's your deer numbers? What kind of soil do you have? I mean, do you have sand versus really productive farmland? You know, like, you know, in your area in Minnesota, you get in those upper reaches. It could be really wet in spots. You can get into some really fertile ground as you get closer to the Mississippi River, and then again, you get pockets of some sand. So again, they won't yield as well on those sandy farms, sandy plots. So again, you might have to plant more acreage, you know, of food plots. And again, another consideration is it a quarter acre field? Is it an acre field? Is it a 5 acre field? These bigger fields, I especially like people to plant at least 3 different mixes out on their plots. Generally recommend planting more of the perennials along the edges to create scrape lines for the deer. Also benefits for those out there that like the turkey hunt. And then at least plant 2 different fall blends. I mean, any large fields, guys should consider planting 2 to 3 different fall blends, because then you just rotate each of the blends from year to year. On your property, I mean, I work with people that might be planting 10 to 12 different Grandpa Ray food plot mixes, and each mix has a purpose, and so, John, you can make it as simple or as complicated when it comes to strategy as you want it, but yet there is strategy, and that's why I'm here. Instead of just a company that products are on a shelf, up at those stores up in Minnesota, there's the ability for, the end user to get on the phone and call me and say, hey, John, can I send you aerial maps, or can I tell you more information, or can I send you my soil samples, and can you help me, with what mixes are the best to plant on my property?
Yeah, and that's one thing that, I think we can do a pretty good job with our customers with too, with using the aerial map. We all of us pretty much got Onyx, and that's how I do all my food plot planning, and we can with Grandpa Ray's mixes here, we can definitely help them out, figure some of that stuff out as well.
As we
and that's what Grandpa Ray's is about. I mean, it's about, no matter if it's myself helping or my dealers helping, it's like that's the key. There's resources, there's people here that are willing to help, the average food plotter. It's not a company that's just trying to slap seed on the shelf and say, hey, buy our seed.
Yeah, and I think, that's one of the things that yourself and our stores are going to do different than if you just go to a box store and pick a bag of seed off the shelf. We want to make sure that it's the best stuff going in the ground. You're giving yourself the best chance. I mean, heck, you're putting the work in it and the time into it, and the little bit of monetary difference between a cheap seed and a quality seed, I just don't. I think you're shortchanging yourself if you put something in the ground and go through all that work and time and don't have the best chance to have success.
Well, and my little thing that I will bring up to people is that everybody, says, hey, I want to see deer. But my question is like, okay, if an average food plot blend will produce a couple tons of forage dry matter per acre, or as I say it, like 4,000 deer feedings. But if you buy a high-yielding, high-quality mix, as Grandpa Ray sells, that might yield 2,000 to 4,000 more pounds of forage, 2,000 to 4,000 pounds more, or 2,000 to 4,000 more deer feedings. What does that mean to you as a hunter to have twice the yield? Wouldn't, in theory, you have the potential to feed twice as many deer, or feed the same amount of deer you have on your property for twice as long? And sometimes when I present that to people, that just gets them to stop and think, because yield matters.
I got you. I got a couple scenarios that I want to throw at you, John, if you don't mind, quick before we wrap up today's, which had been a wealth of knowledge, opened up my eyes on quite a few things. But the first scenario, you've already covered it, but we had some questions come in from customers, knowing that we were going to do this podcast. He's in northern Minnesota. It's 90% pine trees is where they're at. They have some sandy soil, but they did find on their land they could get back with their four-wheelers. And he said it's about 60 foot wide, and then they can 200 yards long. So basically exaggerated football field. They killed off the weeds. They say it is pretty sandy soil. They did get a pH test back, and they did put down some lime. I'm not sure exactly how or what they did, but their question is, they're sitting on the bubble. What seeds do we need to order? What do we need to get from the shop? They're gonna go up after July 4th holiday and plant. What would your prescription be for that?
Yeah. So if they want to plant just after July 4th, I mean, with what you're telling me, greens, it's a mix you'd really think, it would do really well in their area, but then again, it might be just a little early to plant. If they still want to plant it, what I would say is, well, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Maybe you only plant, like an acre's worth. Yeah, it's going to be a little early potentially to put that in the ground, but don't just rely on that mix. We want to rely on, like your fall draw and Frosty Delight that gives you a little bit more window.
Okay.
for maturity. So in a case like that, 60 feet wide, that long, and again, keep it in mind, not just this year, but next, maybe they just use 1 acre's worth of grains and greens and either put it as a strip or as a block, on part of it. And I would also plant each of the fall draw and the grains and greens. So I would plant each of those 3 mixes, and let's just say if that area ends up being 3 acres, plant 225 pounds of grains and greens, do an acre, plant, 2 of the the small bags of Frosty Delight to do an acre, and then plant, 3 of the 4 1/4 pound bags of fall draw to plant the last acre. So, each of those mixes will do fine. And, that way it kind of gives you a little more diversity. And again, it also sets you up for success, the following year where you can rotate each of those mixes. So, don't just rely on grains and greens if you're going to be planting that early, because with the winter wheat, winter rye, winter triticale, they generally would want to be in the ground a little bit later, end of July, early August up in your areas.
I love it. This one's going to be real easy. I know the answer, but I want to hear it from a professional. So we are in Goodhue County, Minnesota. That just gives our listeners an idea of the fertile ground. We're talking 200-plus bushel corn and really good soybean. It's a 300-acre farm. They deer hunt it, bow hunt, and rifle hunt, or shotgun hunt, but it's all row. 200 acres of it is row crop. They're wondering what they can do. Do they concentrate on other food, or do they go into one of your fortress mix or your sanctuary mix for the other areas?
Yeah. And for me, the basics, deer need food, bedding, and water. And for those that hear me talk, it's like my deer and bird mix could be great annual bedding cover. It also could be great winter feed, which I don't believe hardly anybody has too much winter feed. And so anybody I work with, I strongly encourage people to put about an acre of deer and bird in on their properties if they can. The other advantage is also great for the soil health. It also is a great natural weed deterrent. So deer and bird could be a great way to hold deer, or also when it gets to be even, during gun season where, let's just say, the weather gets kind of nasty, those deer will bunker down, get underneath in that cover for deer and bird, and it can really help you hold deer even during hunting season. And again, the sanctuary mix is my permanent native grass blend, which again, there's not nearly enough people that consider, thermal cover. Everybody, thinks about, well, deer need to eat, they need water, and they can bed just about anywhere. But these native grasses, way overlooked. They really can help protect deer when things can get pretty nasty. And so then again, what the rest of the equation comes down on that property is, how many acres of plots, where are they located? There's an endless amount of possibilities to have great quality food in that area. So again, try to match the food closest to where the bedding choices are, and also considering the season where you want those deer to eat when you want them to eat there.
That's perfect. And John, we have not only can we hop on your website, you can stop in any 3 of our locations and we can try to help you, but you're also encouraging they can get a hold of you via your contact on your website and ask specific questions, and you can steer them in the right direction on getting the seed that they need, and also planning for years on out, not just this fall, but everything else, correct?
Correct, yeah. So for people that are always looking for information, they can always, reach out to me via email. They can always give me a call, but I usually disclaimer, between the hours of 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., Monday through Friday. There's a lot of means that people can learn more about Grand Berets. I'm putting more and more videos on the Grand Beret Outdoors YouTube channel. On the website, there's videos on there. There's also, I try to blog quite a bit. So, people can reach out to me one-on-one, or there's a lot of education out there that's for free that you can find through my various social media outlets. And again, I try to Twitter on occasion. I'm trying to do a little more Instagram posts when I'm out in the field this time of year. So hopefully I'm giving people a lot of good content and at least some stuff to think about.
We love it, man. We sure appreciate you being on. That was That was an awesome podcast as far as knowledge. Jake, I thank you for being here as well. Again, if you have any questions, you can contact us here at Archery Country, or as we talked about, Grandpa Ray Outdoors. Wealth of information out there yet that we didn't cover, and also we're going to carry a lot of products yet. We got full shelves that we can get to, and we can still order for you guys that are going to
and we got a bunch of stuff coming in right now too.
Nice.
From them, so
super nice. So we appreciate it, John. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys, for having me, and I hope everybody out there has a productive and successful 2021 food plotting and fall hunting season.
We'll send you pictures. On behalf of everybody at Archery Country Podcast, this is Waite signing out.
Thank you for listening to Archery Country Podcast.